Hello and welcome to MEE Live. Join us as we take another look at today's biggest stories.
We are streaming live to YouTube from Middle East Eye's headquarters here in London.
I'm Mohammed Hassan.
And I'm Matilda Mallinson. Today is Thursday, the 10th of April.
Big news day today. We're heading straight to The Hague, aren't we?
We are, and what's happening is still in process. Currently, in the International Court of Justice, the UAE is delivering its defense to a case that has been brought against it by Sudan, accusing the Emirates of complicity in genocide. But it's not clear whether this case will go forward, so we will be speaking to a legal expert about that, as well as an activist from Sudan about the human story behind it all.
Wow.
What have you got for us today, Mohammed?
Well, if you were here joining us on Tuesday, we had a pretty explosive story. We were speaking to two former Microsoft engineers who walked out in protest of the company's continued collaboration with the Israeli army. Today, we are taking another look at that story, but an even bigger project. It's called Project Nimbus, which takes place between Google and Amazon, two of the biggest tech companies in the world, worth about $1.2 billion. Now, what exactly is Project Nimbus? What does it have to do with the war in Gaza, and why should you be paying attention? All of that we're going to be covering later on in the show today.
That's a story with massive implications. First, though, let's take a look at the headlines.
So first up, is the UAE on trial or not? The International Court of Justice is hearing a case brought by Sudan against the United Arab Emirates, alleging complicity in genocide during the ongoing civil war. The two-year conflict, which pitted Sudan's army against the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, has led to tens of thousands of deaths, 12 million people displaced, and what the United Nations called the world's worst famine. Sudan alleges the UAE has armed the RSF's ethnic violence against the Masalit people in West Darfur and its use of rape as a weapon of war. The UAE says the case is a cynical publicity stunt and is seeking an immediate dismissal. Now, earlier this year, the US backed these accusations of genocide and sanctioned the RSF's leader, known as Hameti. But since the war began, both the RSF and the Sudanese army have both been accused of committing atrocities. Now, stay tuned for a look inside the courtroom and an answer to some of the questions this story raises from international human rights lawyer Dr. Mohammed Abdeslam Babakir.
Nearly 10 years ago, footage of a 13-year-old Palestinian boy splayed out with broken limbs and run over by an Israeli patrol so shocked global audiences that you may still remember it today. Now, the immediate footage of his arrest is so graphic that we can't show it, but what you just saw was his interrogation by Israeli police at the age of just 13. Now, after spending half of his life behind bars, Palestinian prisoner Ahmad Manasra has been freed. The now 23-year-old was arrested in 2015 on allegations of the attempted murder of two Israelis in a knife attack, for which he was later convicted. His release rounds off years-long campaigning by human rights organization and nearly a decade of imprisonment in Israeli-run prisons, which has rendered the young Palestinian with severe medical conditions, including schizophrenia, psychosis, and severe depression. His image has become a symbol of the brutal policing and imprisonment of Palestinian children by the Israeli state.
Now, staying in Israel, the Air Force has dismissed more than 1,000 reservists after they signed a petition calling for a new hostage deal with Hamas and an end to the war in Gaza. In a letter published to Israeli media this morning, 970 reserve Air Force officers, including some pilots currently on duty, accused the government of continuing the war for political and personal reasons and putting the lives of Israeli hostages at risk. In late March, thousands of demonstrators led by families of the captives voiced their anger over Israel's decision to unilaterally breach a 2-month ceasefire. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu supported the Air Force decision to dismiss the signatories, saying they represented a radical, marginal group trying to fracture Israeli society.
Today, Thursday, the International Court of Justice hears Sudan's plea for emergency measures against the UAE to prevent genocidal, ethnic, and sexual violence in which it argues the Emirates are complicit. On the 6th of March, Sudan filed a case against the UAE, accusing it of breaching the Genocide Convention by arming and funding the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF. This image shows RSF leader Hemeti meeting with UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed, symbolizing the controversial partnership at the heart of this trial. Hemeti, or Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, is the military leader at the head of the paramilitary RSF, one of the two main warring parties in the 2-year conflict that has fueled the world's worst humanitarian crisis in Sudan. Tens, possibly hundreds of thousands dead, the numbers are untraceable, and over 12 million people displaced from their homes. And in Darfur, the RSF is accused of targeted ethnic violence against the non-Arab Masalit population, intended to eliminate the population in what would, of course, amount to genocide if true. The group has also been accused not just by Sudan, but human rights organizations such as the UN and Amnesty International of raping and enslaving women and girls, systematically destroying Sudan's food and safe water production, and summarily executing civilians. In front of the UN's highest court in The Hague today, Thursday, Sudan unequivocally accused the UAE of fueling genocide via illicit gold smuggling and direct military support.
It is an honor to appear before you on behalf of the Sudan to address the facts. As I will explain, including by reference to UN sources, there can be no doubt that the Masalit people is currently being subjected to genocide, and that there is serious evidence that the UAE is failing to prevent this and is complicit.
After describing a crisis marked by ethnic cleansing, mass murder, and sexual violence, Sudan's legal team concluded, firstly, that the RSF and allied militia have committed genocide, that the UAE is supplying weapons used in these crimes, and thirdly, that much of Sudan's gold, which is funding the war, is being smuggled to the UAE to serve this goal. The UAE is set to present its defence in The Hague on Thursday afternoon. When the case was first filed, the UAE diplomatic advisor Anwar Gargash publicly denounced it as farcical in a state-owned newspaper. He called the lawsuit a political game and a publicity stunt, blaming Sudan's military-led government for driving the nation's violence itself. The UAE has also challenged the court's jurisdiction over its actions, and it is yet unclear whether the full case will go ahead in The Hague. But how much weight does this case hold, and even if it triumphs, what power does the ICJ have to enforce any difference? Joining us to answer some questions is Dr. Mohammed Abdel Salam Babekar, an associate professor of law, human rights lawyer, and UN regional expert. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. You're welcome.
So we have heard Sudan's accusations, UAE complicity in genocide, but the UAE has challenged the court's jurisdiction to hear this case. So how strong is Sudan's case looking from a legal point of view?
Thank you so much. Actually, the issue of the legal issues here, we are talking about three main issues. The one is actually called the jurisdiction, and the second one is actually the provisional measures, and the third one is actually the merits of the case. And in terms of legal issues, Sudan is actually has to face the issue of the reservation by the Genocide Convention. Actually, UAE reserved on Article 9 of the Genocide Convention. And actually, UAE in its submission just a few minutes ago said that the court has no jurisdiction to hear the case. And even the lawyers of the UAE mentioned that even the case should not be even in the court list, and provided like case law that the case does not have any jurisdiction to proceed with the case, and also the legal representative of the UAE provided relied on some cases like the genocide case, 1951, like Rwanda case, like Yugoslavia case, and all these are established principles with regard to the legality of the case. Sudan provided a different argument regarding the reservation. Sudan said that the reservation are provided by the UAE are different from other reservations adopted by other countries. So here, this is like a lot of legal niceties regarding this issue. And now, in order for the court, for the ICJ to proceed, it has actually to issue a ruling with regard to its jurisdiction. And in legal terms, Sudan, the case cannot be admitted to the court, to the merit stage, unless the court ruled on that issue. And in my view, the issue of legality with regard to the Sudan chance, in my view, I guess the methodology adopted by Sudan is not the right one, because it is in order to avoid any legal challenges, you need to look at the convention as the reservations. Sudan could have actually adopted a different methodology in terms of the violations, not only in Darfur, but in the whole of Sudan, but committed by the RSF. So, for example, there is also other cases like the Nicaragua case that Sudan could actually actually proceed in submit a case related to violation of IHL, like the Geneva Conventions and the protocols, not the Genocide Convention, because the Genocide Convention, in terms of the threshold, is very high, because you have to prove intent, and also you have to prove that the UAE is actually aiding and abetting, and this is requires a lot of material evidence in order to prove that. So I guess that in terms of legality, it requires a lot of effort. Today, Sudan legal representative made a lot of effort in order to convince the court that the court will have a jurisdiction, and I think it will be like a real battle with regard to the court accepting the case to proceed.
So there are a lot of hurdles before it gets to this stage. But in the meantime, Sudan has called on the ICJ to take emergency action and order the Emirates to prevent genocidal acts on Darfur. Ultimately, they are also calling for the court to determine appropriate compensation if the UAE is found guilty of complicity in genocide. Does the court have the power to enforce these forms of justice? And what would compensation even look like?
Actually, the court would not have any power to enforce any decision unless it passed the issue of jurisdiction. So this is like the court will not go into the merit of the case. The court will not go to discuss to what extent. First of all, you need to prove that genocide has been committed. And second, you need to provide that the UAE aided the RSF. But this stage is not yet there. You have to overcome the issue of jurisdiction, and then you go to the compensation issue, and you go to the merit of the case.
But say we got to that stage. Sorry to interrupt, but say we got to that stage, say jurisdiction was approved. Is there likely, would there be powers, would the court have powers to deliver the changes that Sudan is looking for?
Absolutely. If the court proceeds to the merit stage and decides that Sudan RSF committed genocide, which is there's a lot of indication that RSF committed not only genocide but crimes against humanity and war crimes, and then you need to prove the complicity, that's the aiding and abetting and control and finance. and then that UAE failed not only to punish but also to prevent genocide. And if this is approved, then the court has jurisdiction, has the power to issue a ruling with regard to compensation. And there is many cases with regard to compensation issued by the ICJ, the International Court of Justice.
Now, the UAE is not the only country that Sudan's government has accused, if not legally, unofficially, of supporting the RSF. Kenya and Chad are other examples. Could they be vulnerable to legal action as well?
It is possible in terms of like, with regard to Chad actually is like Sudan provided that. Chad provided support to the RSF through like Umjaras and some areas that providing support to these troops by providing the logistical base. This could be regarded as an interference in the sovereign by Chad as against Sudan as a sovereign state. But also this requires that you need to look at the treaties relevant to such kind of allegation against by Sudan against Chad, because also both states they have to consent to the court jurisdiction. With regard to Kenya is different. Kenya is actually accused by Sudan is actually hosting the rebel groups, the RSF and the new alliance. And this is related to an international law, to an issue related to recognition. It is not related to, which is actually every state has the right to recognize another rebel group. But actually, this is an issue also regarding other interference by Sudan. Sudan make a lot of allegations against Kenya, supporting indirectly the RSF. But from legal terms, it will be like difficult for Sudan to institute any proceedings unless you have like hardcore evidence.
Okay.
But in terms of international relations, Sudan can actually politically using this case and also against the UAE. The case has ramifications in terms of media, in terms of media messages, in terms of also highlighting the atrocities committed in Sudan.
Yeah.
So from a political perspective, media perspective, there's a lot of messages coming out of this case. But from a legal point of view, there will be a lot of challenges in terms of for the case to move forward.
Yeah, I think that's sort of what I'm hearing, that there are a lot of legal barriers to actual likelihood of legal justice being forced on UAE, or a precedent being set for other countries who may be funding or backing the RSF. But the importance of this case stretches beyond the legal outcome. There is symbolic value, bringing media focus to the plight of the Masalit people, sending a message to the international community. If that is the case, what kind of message is being sent to the international community with this trial?
I think this is a lot of messages for the international community. Actually, Sudan has actually outside the radar for a long time, because it's actually it is like a forgotten crisis, and because of the conflict in Ukraine, the conflict in Gaza. So Sudan is not in the limelight of the media. I'm glad that now the Middle East eye is actually focusing on this case. What happened in Sudan is actually not only the commission of genocide, the commission of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and also the situation amounts to genocide. And this requires even for the ICC jurisdiction to extend to all of Sudan, not only Darfur, because the crimes committed in Sudan by all parties, it is actually heinous, in particular the RSF, with regard to genocide against the Masalit, and also with regard to the war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in other parts of the Sudan, in Khartoum, and also in Jazeera. And this requires a form of accountability beyond the ICJ, because here we are talking about criminality, about international criminal law. We're not talking about the ICJ. We're not talking about the state responsibility. And I hope that there will be an international mechanism. Now we have the fact-finding mission, conducting investigation by the Human Rights Council, and last year the Commission of Inquiry issued its report. There is also a lot of evidence about that violations committed by the RSF and also the army in terms of bombardment. And here you need really an important international focus with regard to accountability, either like a hybrid court for Sudan or a national process that the Sudan government should be keen and eager to prosecute those who committed crimes, including those from the army. And I hope this will be this will resolve the issue of accountability, the issue of compensation, and the issue of reparation to the victims.
Right. Because if we look at the details of this case, the UAE complicity or alleged complicity, it comes down to the arms trade and the gold trade, and that is not just something that implicates the UAE. You know, indirectly, many countries are selling arms to the UAE that could be going into this conflict, and many countries and consumers around the world are buying the gold that is supposedly funding this conflict. My final question then is, how should UAE allies, trade partners, for example, the UK, which is where we're streaming from, and which sells substantial arms to the UAE, how should they respond to the serious accusations that have been made in the court today?
Actually, I'm glad that you brought this point because on the 15th of April, the UK is actually holding a conference on Sudan. The UK is not serious about the violations committed in Sudan. The UK actually puts its interest before human rights. Although the foreign minister went to Chad, to the refugee camps, and talking about Sudan, tried to bring Sudan to the limelight, but it seems that the UK foreign policy is not putting Sudan interest. Particularly Sudan is like a former colonial power. It's putting the business interest of the UK before the victims, the Sudanese victims. In particular, there is obligation not only in the UK but all countries providing support, providing arms. Countries must, under the Genocide Convention, they should not only punish genocide but actually should act to punish should actually act to prevent the commission of genocide. And as you know, the Sudan conflict has a lot of regional impact. Many actors providing support to each party. And the main victims who are actually bearing the brunt of violations are actually the Sudanese, the civilian populations. And the war will not continue without external support. And I think this is important. I hope external powers, including the UK, they should actually adopt an ethical foreign policy with regard to how to address the root causes of the conflict in Sudan. Not only focusing only on humanitarian assistance, on the symptoms of the conflict. They have to actually address the core and the root causes of the conflict in Sudan.
Dr. Mohammed Abdel Salam Babakar, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
Now, before we move on, I want to peel back the legal layer of this story and focus on the human reality behind it, or as Dr. Babakar just pointed out, the real victims of this story. And those are the people who have suffered war in Sudan and are still suffering that war. Earlier, I spoke to a Sudanese activist called Sarah Margani, and here's what she said.
The EJ case against the UAE is deeply personal. For 2 years, we've watched our country be torn apart by a war that's been funded and fueled by foreign powers, especially the UAE. They've armed the RSF, the same militia responsible for mass killings, sexual violence, and the largest displacement crisis in the world right now. We've seen the proof all over social media, and still the UAE denies it and hides behind their power. But this case is Sudan standing up and saying we won't be silenced and we won't let this slide. It's about justice, dignity, and fighting for every life that's been lost.
Next up, Silicon Valley's controversial ties to war in Israel and beyond.
Welcome back. This is MEE's Lives Deep Dive, where we dive into a story shaking up the world. And here's a question. Has Silicon Valley sold its soul to the military-industrial complex? It increasingly appears the days of ethical tech companies promising a better, safer world are long gone. And Google, who once enshrined the mantra, "Don't be evil," into its manifesto, is at the center of it all. On Tuesday, we heard from Microsoft employees who staged a daring protest at the company's 50-year anniversary celebration. You may have seen the footage. AI engineer Ibtihal Abu Said told us how the tech giant is helping Israel surveil and translate conversations by Palestinians in Gaza before they're targeted with airstrikes. But Microsoft is just the tip of the iceberg. A growing number of tech workers inside the world's most valuable companies are speaking up, risking their careers to highlight what they say is a growing ties between big tech and Israel's high-tech war in Gaza. One of the biggest and most secretive of these is Project Nimbus. We first caught wind of it back in 2022, when Amazon and Google staff began raising the alarm about a $1.2 billion contract between those two companies and the Israeli government. The contract gave Israel's army access to the state-of-the-art cloud services and data centers built specifically to help it monitor the West Bank and Gaza and carry out military strikes efficiently. Last year in May, Google cloud engineers disrupted a conference in New York held by Barak Regev, Google Israel's managing director. Have a listen.
I'm a Google Cloud software engineer, and I refuse to build technology that powers genocide, apartheid, or surveillance. Project Nimbus puts Palestinian community members in danger. I refuse to build technology that's going to be used for cloud apartheid. No cloud for apartheid. No tech for apartheid. Free Palestine.
Google is complicit in Israeli genocide.
By the way, those two engineers that you saw in the video, as well as dozens of others who took part in these protests, were all fired. So why does Israel's army actually need state-of-the-art data centers anyway? Well, it's increasingly using AI technology in its targeting of airstrikes in Gaza. Last year, investigations by The Guardian and 972 magazine uncovered Project Lavender, an AI system designed by Israeli intelligence unit 8200. Its job is to scan Gaza and highlight thousands of potential targets at much faster rates than a human being is capable of. This is because Israel was bombing Gaza so frequently that it was running out of targets. Now, to tell us more, we're joined now by MEE investigative reporter Aribullah. Arib, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me, Mohammed.
Now, let's start with a basic question. What can you tell me about Project Nimbus?
Project Nimbus was actually established in 2021, and it's a partnership between the Israeli government, Google, and Amazon. And it's a project that's worth approximately $1.2 billion, which isn't a lot for companies like Google and Amazon. And it's designed to basically provide cloud computing services for the Israeli government. Now, this is really important because the Israeli government is obviously comprised of a number of branches: judiciary, finance ministry, the army, the Shin Bet, Mossad, etc., etc. But the way this deal was even announced to the public was very vague, and that's what made a lot of human rights activists quite concerned about this project, what it is, what it stands for. And what's really interesting is that we've only really found out about what Nimbus does, or what it may or may not be doing, through leaks from Google employees, from reports like you mentioned by 972 magazine and The Guardian. So yeah, there's a lot of secrecy around this project, and it's still a bit unclear as to what exactly Google and Amazon are providing to the Israeli government.
Now, $1.2 billion, as you mentioned, is not a lot when it comes to the size of these companies.
No.
But for me and you, it's quite a considerable amount of money. And certainly for a contract with a government, it kind of hints at quite a lot that they're providing in exchange. And I understand that we don't know an awful lot about what is being offered, but when it comes to cloud services and data centers that Google and Amazon specialize in, what exactly do we believe that these are being used for in Israel?
I mean, one thing that we do know is that Project Nimbus is geared towards providing cloud computing services specifically for machine learning and artificial intelligence. And one thing that's becoming more clear is that Google is now shifting its business model towards more defense contracts in particular, and it's computing, right? It's a space that's in heavy competition with the likes of Amazon, Microsoft, etc. And Google at the minute is perceived as effectively losing the AI battle when it comes to these kind of services. So what Google has basically been doing for the last few years has been playing catch up to try and compete with its rivals. And one of the ways it does compete with its rivals is by acquiring smaller companies or companies that are perceived to be smaller to then be swallowed up into the kind of Google kind of infrastructure. So I know you're probably going to ask me this question already, but for example, earlier this year, Google acquired a company called Wiz. Wiz was acquired for 32 billion. And when I spoke to my sources inside Google, I think one of the first things they said to me was, that's a lot of money.
It's actually the biggest acquisition in history, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And even employees within Google who aren't really sympathetic to this cause, especially in terms of Google acquiring defense companies or companies that have a specialism geared towards the defense industry, even they were saying this is an awful lot of money. And when I spoke to human rights activists and researchers who focus on this area, for a lot of them, what they were saying was, this is also a sign of Google's desperation in trying to compete with its rivals in this space. And that acquisition was definitely an intent, you could argue, from Google's point of view, of saying that we're here to stay and we're willing to put as much resources as possible in making sure that happens.
Now, I want to ask you to dig a little deeper into this, because Google has been this company at the forefront of this tech revolution in Silicon Valley. It came out with this mantra, don't be evil, but that it and a lot of other companies promised all of us, really, especially the users that helped it kind of come to the fore, that it would make the world better, that it would be ethical companies, that it will turn a new leaf on the way that technology is used and the way that it interacts with the world for the betterment of humanity. That is something that you hear over and over again, or at least you used to hear from these kind of Silicon Valley types. But as you're mentioning, there has been this AI war, this battle to get to the forefront of how this technology is used, and that increasingly has gone into the military sector. Why is that? What is the allure of the military structures and these government contracts that is pulling these companies away from the origins of having these humanitarian aspirations? It appears we may have lost Arib for a second. So one thing that, Arib mentioned this acquisition of the company Wiz. There was last year actually back in 2013 rather, another acquisition that Google made with another Israeli company called Waze, which was a satellite mapping technology company. And back then there were concerns that were raised even as early as 2013 about what exactly this technology was going to be used for, but more importantly, the ways in which that technology was actually advanced. And part of the suspicion around a company like Wiz is the fact that its founders six of its founders actually came from this Israeli intelligence unit 8200 that I mentioned earlier. And the accusation that Israel's military and its intelligence has levied against it for years now is the fact that at the forefront of its high-tech industry, at the forefront of these military advances that it then collaborates and sells to companies in Silicon Valley, has been the war in Gaza and the military attempts at kind of using this technology and testing it in real time on the ground in Gaza, and then using that as an opportunity to market and advertise those weapons abroad. So those two companies that Google have acquired have now become part of this kind of gigantic infrastructure of Google itself. There's certainly lots of question marks around them. And this latest attempt, I suppose, at Google to venture more heavily into the military-industrial complex, into the forefront of the AI battle for supremacy, has become sort of this common thread that we're seeing, not just with Google, but with Amazon and then with Microsoft that we spoke about earlier on Tuesday. Now, we are hoping to get Arib back onto the show. Arib, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Fantastic. So I want to ask you about the employees that you have been speaking to inside these companies. Of course, much of what we know about what these big projects are actually doing is because of these people working inside these tech companies themselves that have decided to speak up. What is happening to these employees once they have decided to raise these issues, and why go to the lengths of airing them publicly in the ways that some of them have?
It's a really interesting question, and one of the reasons
it appears that Arib is having a little bit of technical difficulties.
I'm going to step in here because I suspect you know the answer to that question, and I would personally love to know what is happening to the employees who have been raising these issues with the company.
So I know that Arib and others, MEE, have been speaking to a lot of these employees over the last 2 years and publishing a lot of really fantastic work from them. And what we've been hearing over and over again, this again, similar to the story that we heard on Tuesday with those Microsoft employees that spoke up, is that within the current infrastructure of these companies, there is very little avenues to actually be able to speak up, even though they're told constantly over and over again by HR departments, by their bosses, that this is a friendly environment, that any kind of critique is welcomed and actually encouraged. But what they find is when they actually speak up, either their voices are shut or they're sidelined, and then ultimately, as Arib has been finding out, they have been forced to take their grievances public. Arib, I believe you're back with us now.
I'm so sorry about that.
That's okay. So you were interrupted before, but you were telling us about some of these employees that you've been speaking to inside Google.
Yeah, I mean, these employees have been trying to voice their concerns internally for months now. And what's really interesting is, I mean, the best way to describe Google as a company is as if it's like Google tries to market themselves as being like university campus, where you can voice your concerns, voice your issues within open meetings that they typically have periodically throughout the year inside Google. And you've not only got physical meetings, but you also have online forums within Google, where Googlers, as they call themselves, try and raise these issues within various fora, i.e. through the direct team or through the actual company-wide forums itself. But one thing they've been picking up is that their messages are being deleted by Google's admins. So Google actually has internal admins like filtering messages to kind of ensure that there's no harassment and it doesn't break HR policies. And when that wasn't working, these activists then decided to turn their activism to the offline world, where they'd actually be trying to speak to their fellow employees. They'd be asking to sign petitions, etc., and also hold physical protests. And those physical protests were met with heavy security from Google itself, to the point that some of them were actually fired the day after. And a lot of these individuals, they'd never ever anticipate something like this happening to them, because Google, like I said, have always kind of portrayed themselves as fostering an open culture of being willing to listen to their employees and whatnot. But it seems to be that that's not the case anymore.
And do you think that is the change that is happening inside a company like Google, or is it something specifically about these military contracts that these tech giants are particularly sensitive to?
I think it's a bit of both. And the reason I say that is because Google has been changing its own internal policies to try and allow itself to have some cover to actually go and engage these defense contracts. So, for example, a few years ago, Google had set out these AI principles, and within those AI principles, one of the principles that they actually established themselves was that they wouldn't be using the AI services for defense purposes. But Google recently quietly got rid of that policy itself, and that for me is a big, and for a lot of employees and human rights activists, a big sign of the direction that Google is heading towards. And if I'm very honest with you, for Google as well, defense is where the money is at, and it's always been the case where the money has been. And we've spoke about the AI kind of like arms race that's been taking place and everything else. And Google is now effectively making a business decision to try and aim towards more defense contracts because they feel that's where the money is at.
Well, very troubling development indeed. Aribullah, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much, guys.
And you can read a lot more about Project Nimbus and a lot of the work that Arib and our investigative team does by heading over to our website, middleeasti.net. Hey, but before we lose you, we want to hear from you.
Absolutely. And you can send us your thoughts, comments, questions anywhere on social media at Middle East Eye or by emailing meelive@middleeasti.net.
We are broadcasting every Tuesday and Thursday, 5 p.m. British Standard Time, 12 p.m. Eastern Time.
See you then.